Welcome to Real Life and Archetypes. My name is Marina. So today we're going to go a little bit dark, and I wanted to talk about what's been going on in the news that everybody is paying attention to. And this is actually a subject that I wanted to address even a few months ago with regard to something a little bit similar, which is when that United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson, was unalived in the streets of New York in December of 2024. And this was a situation as well where I found out that some people were actually cheering what the perpetrator did at that time. I'm not going to use his name. I don't want to glorify that. So this is a kind of reaction and behavior that I find deeply disturbing. And now with what happened to Charlie Kirk, who was assassinated just a few days ago, we're seeing the same kind of reaction. So this is not going to be about politics. This is about archetypes. And what I want to explain is what is going on here, what is happening for people to behave or react that way, and what it's really referring to. So this is all about our shadow, okay? The shadow is the one that creates enemies. And as you can see, the enemy is constructed from denied aspects of the self. So what happens here is that we need to construct an enemy that comes from the things that have been repressed in us. And so we're going to see people who have what we don't have. This is a total construction, and we're going to choose the worst kinds of people to project that onto, just to make sure that we don't do what is the actual work that we need to do, which is to look at our own shadow. So back in relation to what happened to Brian Thompson, you see news headlines. For me, I don't really take it literally in terms of being the reality. In my world, people are normal. They're not extreme. They would never cheer on anything like that. It's one thing to have opinions about how you want society to be organized, and another thing to condone these horrible acts. But I have some connections on Twitter, and in particular, there was this one person that I saw was showing support for the perpetrator of that crime back in December. So that was a few months ago. And so because it's a person who is actually very intelligent, a young person, I was curious. I wanted to know. So I initiated a conversation without conflict to try to probe into why would a person like that condone such an act. And the reply I got was, because I don't think billionaires should exist. So I found out over time that this was actually a talking point that was being said and repeated by so many people. And during what I wanted to be that conversation, I was probing for more. And I was coming with, any reasonable argument that any normal person would have, which is, well, this opinion that you have, it's about organizing society. So you're saying that a specific group of people should not exist. There's a name for that. It starts with a G. I'm not going to be too dramatic, but this is a little weird. So I said to that person, what if somebody decided that your group of people, the kind of person that you represent, should not exist either? What would you make of it? And by the way, who makes the decision for the next person? Because that's kind of godlike, right? Or psychopath-like, really. And that person could not respond any further and said, I just think that billionaires should not exist. And I mean, not to be caught into details, but Brian Thompson, I don't think he was a billionaire. That's not really the point. But now we see with what happened with Charlie Kirk, I mean, the most disturbing thing is to see people online who are cheering. There are different stages here of crossing a line. One is to say, well, I don't care. It's okay. I'm neutral. That's already a line. That's stage one, I guess, of saying, I don't care if people are being unalived like that. A next stage is, well, it's justified because, they repeat, again, talking points from the news and their tribes about this person is this and that, which is, by the way, filled with lies. But the next stage is celebration, which is quite a stage. I mean, you keep crossing the lines like that. And for me, it's very disturbing because, especially with the person that I had talked to, and that's just one person. So I still have questions about how many people in real life, in the real world, actually think that way. People who are not pundits, who are not part of the media. That's something that I really wonder. So I was so disturbed by that because the person I had talked to, as I was saying, is a young person. So, we were all once young and dumb. And I would not finish that quote for you guys, but I don't think I've ever crossed that line. And you know how you look at people and you look at your own experiences as well. I mean, I have prejudices about groups of people. In particular, there's a kind of people, well, it's a nationality group of people. Just because of my own personal experiences, I know I have these strong emotions, but if you told me that there's this switch, and with this switch, I could eliminate the entire country, I would look at you like you're crazy, okay? There's no way. This is just my emotions, something personal. It's not rational. And by the way, I look at the human experience from a universal perspective. I know that the truth deep inside has nothing to do with nationalities or beliefs or things like that. It's just human nature. So for me, even looking at, trying to look at the excuse of being young, it's still difficult for me to really understand because it's such a dissociation from humanity that I find it actually disturbing. It's a little sociopathic to think that way, in my opinion. It's a little too much. And listen, we can have thoughts that are not correct. I understand that. But when you're expressing that kind of support in a public forum, I think that's a step further. That's a little disturbing to me. So the question, about the instinct of elimination, it's something that I have encountered many times in my life. And there are many reasons for it. But what I want to explain is the universal archetype that is at play here. And this is the archetype of the shadow, right? It's about power dynamics. So the urge for power really comes from wounds that we have. And it seems to me, it makes sense. It's a theory that I have seen several times that it comes from, it's a generational wound. There's something in our biography where there's been like a suppression or repression even of some kind of power, because it was tainted as dark, okay? That relates to, for example, making a lot of money is evil because it's evil people. So it's always about power, okay? It's about how we see something as dark. And so we either reject power or we embrace it fully, but everybody's attracted to power, okay? It's actually about something that we want that others have. So let me just show you a quote here. It is through being wounded that power grows and can, in the end, become tremendous, by Nietzsche. So that is the origin of this whole issue with power dynamics, because there's something that happened and it's usually one generation behind, or even two, if you really look at it. It's an interesting perspective to have, that something has become repressed. Okay, you shouldn't be wealthy. You shouldn't be independent. You should think for yourself. You shouldn't. There's something like that. There's an axiom attached to that, by the way, because it actually impacts also philosophical theories that we have, the way that we look at the world, the way that we theorize about things, the way that we, construct points of view. And you're going to see a lot of incoherences in that. And I'm going to show you in the case, for example, of the healthcare CEO, the United Healthcare CEO, and the conversation that I had with this person online. So the theory is, or the justification for the elimination of this person, I mean, I'm using the word, it's not just about trying to bypass YouTube. It's actually a very appropriate word. It's actually very, very direct. It is elimination because it's about, getting rid of something that you think shouldn't exist. It's quite a statement. So the question here is that the justification, the point of view, the theory, okay, that justifies supporting what this person, the perpetrator, did to Brian Thompson is that Brian Thompson was a CEO, and because of his work, he was denying healthcare and he was enriching himself. He was profiting from basically, people who are going to die because of his work. That is, the encapsulation of the justification. So now the person is justifying that and justifying, eliminating that person. So you see the incoherence here. That's how the shadow works. Because what happens is that you become the enemy that you hate. You're doing exactly the same. It's exactly the same. You are discarding a person. So let's say that this is what that CEO did. I mean, that's what healthcare companies are. It's terrible. I hate it too. There's no question about it. I disagree on how to change things, that's for sure. But let's say that this was what this man did. This is how he made his money. He enriched himself because basically healthcare companies, what they do is deny healthcare all the time and abusing people, and that has terrible consequences. So in his mind, I guess, let's speculate that, maybe he thought, I don't care. These are weak people. They're sick. They shouldn't exist. Maybe that's the thought of people like that. I don't know. I don't want to, I'm just speculating for the sake of theorizing here, okay, of explaining a concept. So let's say that this is what that CEO actually thought, and that's why he made his money that way. So he had that instinct of elimination. This is very common, by the way. This is where we're going dark here. This is very common. You see somebody vulnerable and you eliminate them. Okay? Very common in the world. And watch out, because a lot of people who think they don't have that instinct actually do. And it's terrifying. So let's say that this guy had this instinct of elimination. Now you have other people who are saying, well, let's eliminate him because we are self-righteous. We want a better society, a more equal society. We're the good ones. So let's eliminate him. You see the incoherence? Well, that's how the shadow works. And that is a big problem. The thing about the shadow is that we need to really look at it, because if we don't realize that this is part of the human psyche, it's universal. There's a spectrum. There is a spectrum. Not everybody is on the same spectrum of expression of darkness, but we all have a dark side, and we need to watch out for that. It's very, very dangerous. So if you're suddenly crossing these lines and, supporting this person and that person for doing that, you better look at yourself, because you're probably doing something similar in other forms of expressing your power in your everyday life. That is a bullying behavior. So you need to watch out for that. So expression of power and the darkness of power can take many forms. It can be, related to existence. Okay, this person shouldn't exist, or this person shouldn't speak, or this person shouldn't be part of the family, or this person shouldn't whatever. Okay, so it can manifest in many forms, but we all have it. We're all connected to the world of power dynamics and our darkness in the psyche. If we don't realize it, it's going to operate in ways that we may not be fully aware of. Some people have no problem. They're just going to go dark, be conscious about it, and they're totally okay with it. Okay, all right. And they are conscious about it. That's the difference here, because in the case of this person, they're not conscious of how incoherent that is. And the proof is that, I couldn't even continue the conversation. It was like, I just don't think that these people should exist. And that was it. That was done and over. Okay, so let's not go deeper, okay? Because to go deeper is to go into the darkness of things. So here's the thing. We don't realize the incoherence about the things that we do or the things that we say or the things that we support. But they have terrible consequences. That is the nature of the shadow. It is destructive. It just generates destruction everywhere. And so I would pose that if you condone something like that, I'm sure none of you watching actually does, but people who condone that kind of stuff, I would pose, the consequences of those actions. First of all, you have a victim. So that's already a victim. You have the family of that victim impacted for life. That's what death does. And it has terrible, terrible consequences. So I guess those people will think, well, it's okay. This family, they have money. Okay. All right. What a great person. Let's look at the perpetrator. This is a young person, a young man who is being hailed as a hero. Well, this guy is going to spend the rest of his life in prison. I'm guessing. Maybe he wins in a trial. Who knows? You never know. But in theory, he would spend the rest of his life in prison if he is indeed the perpetrator. Well, that's not a great life. He's going to be locked up. He's very young. I'm telling you, at some point, if he's not a full-on psychopath or, like a serial killer, at some point, he's going to have to deal with the consequences. It's firsthand for him. Think about his family. This entire family is going to have to deal with the notoriety of being associated with this young man. This is the kind of wounds, by the way, that are going to be passed on to the next generations. Like silence, don't say, don't speak about your background. You know the wounds that it creates and it passes on to the next generation? Well, that's going to be activated, part of the shadow of the next generation. That's how darkness works. That is a problem here. So you have this guy. Now think about these groups of people. Let's say that they're real. Again, this is my question. I don't know people like that. So I'm always wondering. Let's say that there are a lot of people in real life who actually feel that way. So these people are cheering on the perpetrator. Okay, I'm talking about the CEO, but this is applicable to what happened with Charlie Kirk. So now you're egging other people on, you're celebrating the perpetrator. Who's going to pay for what he did for the rest of his life, especially a young person? That's a long life, presumably. Who knows what might happen, but presumably, in theory, that's a long life. You don't have to deal with the consequences. You're on your keyboard, cheering on and maybe creating more people who are going to do the same, egging them on, but you're not going to pay for that. The person, brainwashing, they're not going to pay for that. So that's easy. It's easy to just support, because it's the righteous thing. It's the way to create a better society. You don't have to pay for the consequences, but you're cheering them on. I mean, think about that. That's incredibly harmful. But you would never think that, right? Because you're just on your computer. It's something that is distant. Well, it's having direct consequences on quite a bunch of people already, right? The victim, their family, the perpetrator, their family. But you're in your keyboard. You're on your keyboard, you're typing stuff. Yes, that's the right way. You don't have to pay for the consequences. So talking about being young and foolish, which we all were, but to me, that is crossing a line. That is quite extraordinary. I mean, I've never found that I've had that kind of thought, because if I'm thinking, well, these people should eliminate it, I'm like, well, that's not right. And I don't want to live in a world like that. So speaking about young, what they lack most of all when we're young is the sense, the reality, the experience of consequences. This is something that we start to feel, I surmise, that's my theory, around our 40s. That's when, at least in my case, and I've discussed that with a lot of people, that's when you start to really understand the concept of it keeps you up at night. The things that you've done that you're like, wow, I really fucked up. Except, the fucked up in my case, that's not these things. But imagine for a kid like that, who's been brainwashed by the media, and people always refer to social media. The social media is the media, and the media is exactly the same. They're spreading narratives, and people are repeating the same script. You talk to people who are just clocked, watching the news, they all have exactly the same script. They don't think for themselves. So watch out for that. Watch out for crossing a line and just saying, now I'm normalizing elimination. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Do you really know what that means? Do you understand the consequences of that? Because that guy, the perpetrator of that CEO and the perpetrator, of Charlie Kirk, at some point, because they seem to be like normal people who were suddenly radicalized at some point, whatever the theories here, I don't know, but they seem to come from, normal upbringing, and suddenly something happened. At some point, they're going to confront what they did, and they're paying for the consequences. You think they're going to care that people are cheering them on online? No, they're going to have to face that harsh reality. And boy, is that going to keep them up at night. Also what they did, not just what they're facing, but what they did. Because they eliminated a human being. And that is going to weigh on their conscience as well. So here's the thing. This is what happens with power. This is what happened with destruction. Ultimately, destruction is always going to be self-destructive, because that's the nature of power and destruction. And this is the thing, there's this quote in Spain, this saying in Spain that is, cría cuervos y te sacarán los ojos, which means raise crows and they'll peck your eyes out, because you reap what you sow. Eventually, it's going to turn back on you. That's the instinct of elimination. It might feel like power, but it circles back as self-destruction. It always ends the same way, because you become trapped in that darkness, and eventually it's going to eat you up. So I spoke earlier about where this darkness and this urge for power comes from. So, and speaking of, generational consequences, seeking power to compensate for intense sense of lack, that creates a drive for power, a desire for things driven by wounds. But here's the thing. Power is something that we are attracted to and also we reject. Most people, when you tell them, well, they have this power inside themselves, the desire for power, they say, no, because power is about hierarchy. It's about people in, governments, CEOs like Brian Thompson. They don't identify with that. Well, this is incorrect. We all have the shadow. We all have expression of power, and power is negative by default. And transformation is the transformation of that power from negative to something positive. And it's a very complex process, because if you look at this example, someone who justifies the elimination of a group of people. This is actually something that has been incorporated from, watching the news, talking to people. This is not, from the archetypal perspective, what the soul wants, okay? The soul wants something positive. That's what the hero needs to be connected to. In archetypes, I always go back to the hero. The hero wants to be the best it can be and do what you love. That's what your hero wants, to do what you love. And the process of the hero's journey is about the discovery, not just of your true motivations, but your capacities that are going to enable you to do that. But meanwhile, before you fully discover what it is that you truly love, and that's going to make you become the real person that you should be, that you're meant to be, against what the world is trying to shape you to be, okay? That's the conflict of the hero. That is the battle. Well, until you really come to terms with that and you realize that, you're just going to pursue things that the world is telling you to pursue. And that is the real battle inside. Because even for those who are highly motivated, you can still pursue things that are the wrong things. And that's what I call the wrong references. That this is inherited values. This is what the world is telling you has value that you have to pursue. So the shadow archetype is the one that is directly connected to the hero to deal with those things. And transformation is about revealing the truth that the things that you desire, that you have increased in yourself, capacities, resources. That's why it's all about resources at the most basic level. Those things, they are not coming from your soul. They are things that the world has taught you to do. And so in the case of somebody who takes on that heinous act, or the people who support this and cheer on, well, they're not going to face the consequences, but the perpetrator is. Well, at some point, looking at the shadow, well, that's going to be a nightmare, by the way, because the shadow ends up trapping you. That's why destruction is self-destructive. One of the reasons is that when you see the truth, how do you get out of that nightmare when you're in prison? Because of how they brainwashed you into thinking and normalizing that you have to eliminate a human being. I mean, this is insane. Well, that person is going to be trapped literally, physically, for the rest of his life. After the trial, we'll see the result, okay? But presumably, all right? Same for the Charlie Kirk perpetrator. Everybody's cheering on. Are you willing to go to prison? So think about, the people who are receiving this message and are feeling animated to do things like that. Listen, you're going to end up in prison or dead. But these people on their keyboards are not, but they're cheering you on. So always with the subject of power, think about who has the real power. Because the problem about power is that we're incorporating things that are not truly ours. And we're growing and growing based on these wrong references. And transformation, again, it's about the destruction of the wrong references. This is the beauty of archetypes and symbols. They represent something in absolute terms. So part of the shadow archetype, we've seen that it's about power and destruction. Yes, there is a destruction that needs to happen, but that destruction is about those wrong values, wrong references that you've been incorporating, accumulating, that makes you want to do things or possess things or eliminate people and destroy people for the wrong reasons. It's not really coming from you, not from an archetypal perspective. So there needs to be a destruction of that, and that destruction is absolutely brutal. Transformation is brutal. Real change is brutal. True power is the power to change. It's not about accumulating things. It's about changing. It's about seeing the truth, okay? And that is a savage process that most people will never get into. I have made videos related to this concept. I want you to look it up. And I've also made a video recently about conflict, the concept of conflict. And at some point I mentioned a comic book that comes from my childhood, Astérix and Obélix. I was born and raised in France, and there is this comic book called La Zizanie, okay? And it's about how there's this indomitable village. The Romans cannot conquer this small village, and Caesar, the Roman emperor, is really desperate. He's becoming humiliated by the Senate, and they're saying, why is it that you can't conquer these people? And so they tell him that there's this person that he can use, and the skill that this person has is to sow division, because they realize that the strength of this village is their unity. And so they need to destroy that. And they start to spread rumors. And, you know, it's a very interesting story. You can look at it in that video to know more about it. But the point here is that this whole thing, the village, you know, they're just arguing and they become divided, and then they have to resolve the conflict. And they don't know that there's this higher power, which is Caesar, who is actually, you know, how do you call that in English? They're moving, they're utilizing the puppet master. He's the puppet master. That's what is happening. So when you think about the impact of the news, the media, and again, for those who think it's just social media, it's not. The media is a business and it's a narrative machine. So they're going to tell you what they want you to know, not the truth. Okay, we know that at this point. So the question is, think about, you know, the thoughts that you have, the perspective that you have on the world, which a lot of people love to think that, you know, oh, well, I understand how the world works because, you know, I watch this show. You really do? No, you're just repeating what somebody's telling you that you should know. And this original concept is being distributed to you for a very specific reason. I mean, at the very minimum, just to keep your eyeballs on the screen. But then there's a lot more going on. So to drive people to take these actions, elimination, and so many people cheering on those acts, this is not natural. This is not organic. This is people who know exactly human psychology, and they know how to manipulate that. Because here's the thing, what the shadow archetype is dealing with, you know, all those desires, power, everything that is dark. This is power, by the way. The desire to eliminate someone, that's a desire to express power. So again, these people who are always thinking, I'm a good person, I just want the best, you know, this is the way society should be. No, what's happening here is that you're expressing your darkness, okay? That's what's really happening. That's the truth. That is the truth. That's not being a good person when you eliminate others. Just like eliminating people because they're sick and you're like, you know what, I'm going to profit off of that. I'm not praising that either. This is all about the lower self. It's the part of us that is at the lowest level, okay? The lowest self, consumed by negative emotions, temptations, and obsessions. People do not want to look at their shadows. They will never admit it, or they will admit it fully and are totally dark and conscious. But most people, they just don't want to see that. They love and hate power. Pay attention. It's the same thing. I hear so many people just say, rich people, they're awful. They just criticize them all the time. And their behavior Their behavior reveals that what they want is more money. And what they do, because this is what darkness does, is that they steal or do things, in a dark way to accumulate resources. That's what darkness does. That's what the shadow does. And so what they want is to be wealthy. That's what the shadow does. Okay? It's denied aspects of the self. You just create an enemy. Rich people or people who speak. The lower self, the shadow, desires what it lacks and hates the enemy that has. And you're intensely triggered by what others have because you don't have it. And really what happens is that you want it. That's the question here, okay? The problem with incoherence, idealism, I wanted to mention, by the way, about idealism, because people who are idealistic, they want to rely on that. Like, I just want the best for the world. I want a better world. Well, there can be darkness in idealism. This is another archetype, the dreamer. The dreamer is like, it's like the fool. I have a lot of this archetype. I know how it works. I have a lot of all of them. But the thing is, every archetype has a negative side. One of them is, being completely foolish, living in a fantasy world, but being also delusional, delusions of grandeur, being grandiose. And this is where you see, like Julius Caesar, like this omniscient, powerful person manipulating people. That's also related to this archetype. It's exactly the same. And it's exactly the same that makes people who are idealistic, I want a better world. Let's eliminate this people. That comes from there. So idealism, what is interesting about this archetype is that it needs to be seasoned with real life experiences. Any form of idealism, this is the same word as idea, okay? Idea, it's an abstraction, conceptualizations that we have. We need the collision with reality to understand how the real world works. And that's how you really can fulfill, make your dreams come true, so to speak. But you have to accept reality. And this is what is difficult in this archetype, because usually with this archetype, you just want to escape the world, okay? It's a complicated one, but I will go into more depth. So the problem here, again, it's about incoherence. You can't argue for a better world while you're cheering for elimination. That is incoherence. That is tyranny. So self-righteousness, the self-righteousness that justifies elimination, that is tyranny. This is what the shadow does. It gives you a lot of incoherence and it makes you a terrible person. So be careful, because it's very important to look at our shadow. And one of the things, I was talking about the media and things like that. This is about the stimulation of the mind. This is something that I talk about again and again. It's so, so important. The stimulation of the mind. The mind wants to be interested in something. The whole concept is about, are you interested? And are you stimulating the mind in a way that matches who you want to be? That's the hero. That's another big thing in the mind archetype. Well, actually, I'm not interested. I hear that all the time. Well, I have to go to an event for my work and I'm not interested. I'm bored and I hate the conversations. Well, because you're not doing a job that is stimulating your mind, and actually it's important for you. It's going to create an entire life around it and you don't like it. And the mind is going to pay for it, especially as you get older. It's a massive, massive archetype. So if you're accumulating, information, enriching your mind with what the news is telling you, the problem here is that it's not you. Your life becomes a lie. That's what happens with the mind, right? Communication, it's about lies. Or your life, your identity is a lie if you're not interested, if you haven't responded to the hero. You're not doing what you love. So your mind and your words become a lie. Like literally, this is not who you really want to be. And then you have no control over your mind and what they're feeding you, because this is the way that most people live. What do you mean I should do what I love? This is like super taboo in our Western society. Do not say that. And a lot of people will warn you against that, because God forbid you should have an individuality, a real one. That's the hero archetype. So if you don't pay attention, like I keep saying, especially to your mind and how you stimulate it and how you're feeding your mind to the point where you might cross those lines, which is crazy, right? It's really crazy. Then you're not in charge. But here's a question that I always ask. If you're not in charge, someone else is.